what's up, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today we are here to preview the NFL Scouting Combine that I feel like has kind of snuck up on a lot of us because Washington season went longer than, let's just say, usual. And so the Scouting Combine is this week, and I feel like it was sooner than usual, even though it is the same week it's always been. But with Washington making it to the conference championship game, this combine has just felt has just come up a lot faster than in previous years. So today we're going to be going over each day. We're going to be talking about positions. We're going to talk about some of the names to watch at each position. And I'll go over the entire scouting combine schedule for you guys. The scouting combine is very, very important for the Washington Commanders, including Adam Peters, or especially since Adam Peters was taken over as the general manager of the Washington Commanders. Adam Peters brought in the most athletic draft class that in the entire league last season, based off of the numbers at the NFL Scouting Combine. So this is a very important event for the Washington Commanders and a very important event for Adam Peters, and kind of can start to separate a couple of guys from the rest, especially ones that you may have on the same tier. If one of them has a more athletic performance than the other, there's going to be a higher chance that Adam Peters is going to draft him than the guy who is less athletic. So I'll get into how all of that is measured and all of that. But first, I kind of want to talk about how much the scouting combine does matter. I mentioned with Washington, it is very important for the Washington Commanders, but not each team takes the scouting combine super seriously, because you look at now all of these all-star games, the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, the I don't know, there's so many CGS All-Star. There's so many other events as well that are measuring and getting numbers and physical measurements for these prospects earlier on in the process, so that when they get to the combine, you kind of already know their numbers. Especially a lot of the day two guys already have performed within the All-Star circuit. So this is kind of the second time we'll be seeing those guys. So yeah, as in some points, the scouting combine has kind of decreased in value, and also with pro days as well. Now each college having their own pro day, and even at some points just singular prospects having their own pro days just for themselves. So it has definitely decreased in value over the last few years, but there's still a lot of very important numbers that will come from Indianapolis, where the scouting combine is going to be held this week. And so I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be tuned into every day of the workouts. I'm gonna enjoy it. It's going to be great. But I do want to preface this by saying some of these things, like the 40-yard dash and some of these numbers, don't tell the whole story. And the scouting combine overall does not tell you the whole story. It has always been film over numbers, film over spring workouts or all-star games and all of that. The film always comes first. And so we'll see some of these prospects have their stock increase by a ton, and some prospects that will see their stock collapse by a good amount. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the film that kind of puts these prospects where they are in the consensus board. So with that being said, before we get into day one, actually, let me go over last year, what last year's 2024 draft class for the Washington Commanders looked like in terms of athleticism and all of that. I want to give a shout out to MathBomb on Twitter. Kentley Platt, I believe is how you say it. He measures all of it. Basically, he is the scouting combine almost. He measures all of these guys' workouts using his relative athletic score system, which kind of puts them in percentiles of athleticism for their height, for their weight, and for their position. So last year's draft class for the Washington Commanders was listed as the number one most athletic draft class in the entire league last year. You look at Jane Daniels and Johnny Newton. Jane Daniels did not participate at the combine. He did not get measured. He did not do the drills, which you need to do the drills to get a RAS score. So he did not do the drills, which means he did not get a score. Johnny Newton was injured for that week. He was coming off of that foot fracture, so he did not get a score either. But for the other 7 prospects, Mikey Sainristil was in the 85th percentile of athleticism for his position. Ben Sinnott was in the 97th percentile, one of the most athletic tight ends we saw in last year's class. Brandon Coleman was in the 99th percentile, 9.97. That is 99.7 percentile. So that is huge. And that was a big reason why Washington liked Brandon Coleman and picked him in the third round and had so much trust in him starting at left tackle, was because of the athleticism. He was the most athletic player in Washington's class that was measured. Luke McCaffrey, 9.44. That's the 94th percentile. Jordan McGee, the fifth rounder out of Temple, 96th percentile. Dom Hampton, fifth rounder out of Washington, 96th percentile. And Javonte Jean-Baptiste in the 92nd percentile. That is that is 6 of the 7 prospects who got grades were in the 90th plus percentile. That is huge. And that is what Washington is going to be eyeing once more in this draft class. We compare that with Ron Rivera's previous classes, right? His most athletic draft class was the 2023 class. Emmanuel Forbes in the 92nd. Quan Martin was in the 92nd, 95th percentile for Ricky Stromberg and Brain Daniels, 83rd percentile for KJ Henry, and 77th percentile for Chris Rodriguez. So that was Ron Rivera's most athletic, and Adam Peters blew that out of the water with this first one. So Adam Peters loves athleticism, and I would keep an eye on that. As the drills go on throughout the week, you'll see numbers and all of that kind of fluctuate. And ultimately, if you're in the 90th percentile or above, that is the board that Adam Peters will be looking at this offseason. So with that being said, let's get into some of these prospects and in some of these positions. So the first workouts will be on Thursday will be on, I believe, Thursday. It'll be day one, linebackers and defensive linemen. Some names to watch here. I think a big guy that I'm looking at is Jalen Walker, the edge rusher / off-ball linebacker out of Georgia. You'll notice that a lot of these names to watch throughout all 4 of these days are going to be guys who did not participate in an all-star game or did not participate in the Shrine or any of the all-star circuit. And so Jalen Walker is someone who's an underclassman. He did not participate in any of the all-star games, but is someone who's going to go in the first round, and someone who reminds me a lot of a guy like Nolan Smith, similar position to Jalen Walker, went to Georgia as well, kind of an off-ball linebacker, moved to edge rusher, undersized, but he really succeeded and showed off his athleticism on the edge. He comes into the combine, and he has a very good combine. Boosts his stock all the way to being a consensus top 15 player. And he did fall to 30th with the Eagles, but I'm starting to see that sort of arc for a guy like Jalen Walker, who Walker could be in play for Washington at 29. I would assume that he goes before then, but Walker is someone that I would keep an eye on because he's one of those guys where you can kind of play him both off the ball and on the ball. He's got experience at both, and he's able to, with his athleticism, he's able to track a lot of space very quickly. He's an undersized edge rusher if you do keep him at edge rusher, but it's someone that I would keep an eye on in that linebacker defensive line kind of position. Another one is someone that actually went to the Senior Bowl, Carson Schweizinger out of UCLA, was someone who a lot of scouts really loved in Mobile and whose stock was kind of exploded in the last month and a half or so. Can you continue to have this? Can you continue to have this arc within his draft stock at the combine in Mobile? That's going to be a question I have, and I assume that he's going to test very well as well. So with both of those guys, Walker and Schweizinger. So Schweizinger is more of a off-ball linebacker primarily, and not really on the defensive line. But that's someone I would keep an eye on at linebacker. And then also on the defensive line, a lot of the top guys did go to the Senior Bowl. You look at Shamar Stewart, Walter Nolan, Deion Walker. A lot of these guys went to the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl. Kenneth Grant as well. But you look at probably the top defensive tackle who's going to be a top 5 player on my big board, and that is Mason Graham. He's currently the number 2 player, I believe, on my big board. Mason Graham is someone I mentioned him before. He's going to represent the Mason name well in the NFL. We need some guys because there's not many guys right now that are good with the name of Mason in their name. So I'm excited for Mason Graham. It's going to be a big boost for the Mason brand in the NFL. what he can do. He's super athletic. He's got great hands, a great pass rush, a bag of pass rush moves, especially for an interior defensive lineman. Good size as well. He's someone that will definitely test well at the combine, and it's going to be fun to watch as well what he's going to run in the 40 if he ends up doing it at defensive line. So he'll run in the 4 and on sub 5 second 40 for sure, probably sub 4.9 at this point. But that's another guy I would love. Now he's going to go in the top 10, so he wouldn't be in Washington's kind of zone, but he's someone that's going to be very good in the NFL. And some other guys on the defensive line, Nick Skeleton out of Texas A&M is someone who was supposed to go to the Senior Bowl and ended up not going to the Senior Bowl. So he's someone that I'm looking forward to seeing because Skeleton is someone who I think could definitely be in play for Washington with the 30th overall pick. Him and James Pierce, who also did not participate in any of the All-Star games. James Pierce, the edge rusher out of Tennessee, both of those guys could definitely be on Washington's radar with the 30th overall pick. It is a very kind of stacked edge rusher group when you get to the late first round. There's a lot of different guys, not only Pierce and Skeleton, but if Shamar Stewart is going to maybe fall a little bit, you have him as well. I would expect Mike Green to go pretty early, but Jack Sawyer is someone who Washington could love too, but just because of that 4 years, he's senior, team captain, and all of that with Ohio State, and you know how much Adam Peters loves that. So he's someone that I think Washington could keep an eye on at 30 as well. So, and then JT Tuimoloau, I was kind of seeing his stock fall in recent weeks, but especially with a lot of these other edge rushers declaring, like James Pierce and Nick Skeleton and Shamar Stewart, where if you weren't entirely sure if they were going to. So, Tuimoloau is someone I think on day 2 that Washington could keep an eye on. It was someone that many Washington fans wanted in the second round last year before he decided to return to school and to Ohio State for another season. So a lot of day 1 guys that I really love that are going to be participating on the first day of the combine, both at linebacker and on the defensive line. Let's move over to the DBs and the tight ends, because this is a position that I think both of these positions, I think Washington will need to address at some point this offseason. Now, tight end may be more so in free agency or bringing back Zach Ertz, but defensive back, I think Washington should at least draft one cornerback in this draft. And whether that's with the 29th overall pick, you look at a Savon Ravel, you look at a Benjamin Morrison with that 29th overall pick. I would love both of those guys. I have high second-round grades on both of them. I think Ravel is someone who was great for Eastern Carolina before tearing his ACL. And Benjamin Morrison, you could maybe say is more of a risk because of his hip injury. But Morrison is someone who I think will be running at the combine and doing drills. So Ravel, meanwhile, I believe is still recovering from his torn ACL. But Morrison is someone who I think he's going to be good with his hip injury. And then another guy I want to kind of mention is Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. Morrison out of Notre Dame, Ravel out of Eastern Carolina. Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State is someone I think Washington could have an eye on. And I'm just curious overall, Washington or not, to see how far he falls in this class, because you look at some of the top corners. Nick Emanwari is someone who I think is going to be probably one of the biggest combine risers, a super athletic safety out of South Carolina. I think Emanwari could definitely be a day 1 pick when it's all said and done, potentially even to Washington in that first round. But Kevin Winston Jr., someone in the about 3rd round, I would say, is where his stock kind of sits. He came into the 2024 season as one of the top safety prospects in the class, but did not really have a great year. He didn't play much for Penn State, but overall did not have a great year as well, because he was kind of dealing with an injury. He did not play well, and he's kind of seen his stock fall. I was very, very shocked when he decided to declare for the draft. I thought he would go back to Penn State because he is an underclassman, but he decided to go back to Penn State. He decided to go away from Penn State and declare for the draft instead of going back. And, I mean, that's where we are with him. Winston is kind of sitting on a late day 2 pick. Potentially could be someone who could fall into day 3 as well. So I was very stunned when Kevin Winston decided to declare for the draft, but I'm excited to see what he can do at the combine, because, again, he's coming off of an injury, and how much his stock will be affected by it as well. So those are a couple of the 3 guys that I would keep an eye on, especially for Washington in that first round. Ravel and Morrison could definitely be names to watch for Washington if they were not if they were to if they were not like to go earlier on than that. So I mentioned switch over to the tight end side. You've got, of course, a lot of these top guys going for the tight ends. You got Colston Loveland, Gunnar Helm, a lot of these other top tight end prospects, Tyler Warren. We're going to see all of them at the scouting combine. But I wanted to kind of ask the fan base as well, like their thoughts on Washington spending a day 2 pick on a tight end, because if you look at how Washington has kind of addressed the tight end position in the last few years, right? The room currently sits with three guys that will be fighting for a roster spot. I'm not talking about like a Cole Turner or anything like that, or Armani Rogers or anyone that may be brought back as a camp body. I'm saying these three guys will all have a shot at making the roster or being on this roster in 2024, and that is Zach Ertz, who's going to be a free agent after this season, and then Ben Sinnott, who Washington spent a second-round pick on just last season, and then John Bates, who was a former fourth-round pick, I believe, for Washington back in 2022, 2021. Don't remember the exact year. I believe it was 2022 maybe. But Bates is more of a blocker. Sinnott is kind of a do-it-all guy who maybe you could say didn't really live up to expectations in year one. We saw a lot from Zach Ertz and how much Zach Ertz could do. I think Sinnott is going to be someone that Washington will want to kind of take that next step. And how much trust do they have in Sinnott? I think it'll be kind of big in seeing how the Zach Ertz situation unfolds. Because, I mean, you look at Ertz, an upcoming free agent, potentially could be moving retirement after this season. But Washington will probably want to bring him back. He was by far one of their most productive weapons for Jaden Daniels last season. He was great for a young quarterback, a very quarterback-friendly tight end, especially in Cliff Kingsbury's offense. And if it's not Zach Ertz, and if they do let Zach Ertz walk, I think that shows a lot of trust that they have in Ben Sinnott. And so over the next few weeks, with free agency coming up March 15th, 16th, whenever that is, you look at it and it's like, I mean, this could be a way in saying, hey, we have a lot of trust in a guy like Ben Sinnott. If they do end up letting Zach Ertz walk. So if they do end up letting Zach Ertz walk, I would definitely want them to bring in another guy, whether it's through free agency or selecting a tight end maybe on day 2. I know there's a lot of guys like Gunnar Helm who could potentially be available out of Texas. Helm is someone that I love. A day 2 grade for him. You look at, I know Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland will probably be the first 2 off the board, but beyond that, I think Helm could definitely be someone for Washington to keep their eye on. Yeah, so that's the tight ends. Let's keep things rolling here. We've got a stacked day 3. Quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. I'm not going to talk about the quarterbacks a lot because as Washington fans, we don't need to. And that is such an awesome thing to say. We don't need to talk about the quarterbacks. We don't have to because we've got our guy. And that is awesome to say. But I will mention this. Tyler Shough out of Louisville has been getting a lot of praise lately. He was the best quarterback in Mobile, down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. And a lot of people are kind of moving him up their boards right now into potentially being in that position to be a quarterback 2 or 3 off the board. So Tyler Shough is someone that I will be keeping an eye on at Indianapolis because if he has a good performance at the combine, I know he's kind of on the older side of prospects, but he was very impressive at Louisville. And so that's someone I would keep an eye on. But let's move to running backs because running backs and wide receivers are, oh my goodness, running backs and wide receivers are 2 positions that Washington actually does need help at. I mean, some people may say I'm crazy for saying we need help at running back. There's Brian Robinson there, Austin Eckler. But you look at what they did down the stretch, just those 2 guys, it was a disaster. Washington could not run the ball with either of them, Eckler or Brian Robinson. Without the threat of Jaden Daniels being a runner on his own, I feel like both of these running backs had a disappointing second half of the year. I know Austin Eckler dealt with multiple concussions this season. Brian Robinson had some injury stuff with his own as well, but both of these guys. Robinson has kind of been injury prone throughout his career, and Austin Eckler back-to-back concussions this season, and both of them just did not look right down the stretch. Washington will need to bring in a running back. It's just in a class like this, it is a stacked class of running backs. I'm probably going to have at least like 8+ guys with day 2 grades at the running back position. That is how good this running back class is. I mean, I'll just go through the list. Okay, of course you've got Ashton Jeanty at the top. All right, and now Ashton Jeanty is kind of, you could say, come back down a little bit in terms of his stock. I still have him as a top 5. I believe he's my number 1 prospect right now. I still got some guys to go through, but he's my number 1 prospect right now. And you could say maybe the gap between him and some of these other running backs has kind of closed a little bit over the last few weeks. But beyond Jeanty, Omarion Hampton out of UNC is someone that I love. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. All right, there are even some guys later on in the draft, like Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. There are so many good running backs. I mean, you just look at the guys that were at the Senior Bowl and the stuff that they did there. I know all-star games aren't really great for running backs, but you just looked at how stacked the running back class was at the Senior Bowl a few weeks ago, and it kind of shows. I mean, this is a very good running back class and a very good class to need a running back. So I would expect Washington to draft one of these guys, or at least in my opinion, they should. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love for Washington to add one of these many good running backs in this class. And I think ultimately Adam Peters will. It's going to be interesting to see what running backs test very well athletically. Running back is a position that kind of really relies on being athletic, kind of historically. And so I'm curious to see what running backs will test very well athletically at the running back position. In terms of wide receivers, I mean, okay, everyone loves the 40-yard dash here with wide receivers, but come on, let's be real. We're grown-ups now. We know that the 40-yard dash at the end of the day is not actually, like, these players are not running in T-shirt and shorts in indoor weather, perfect, like, temperatures, in the NFL. They are not doing that. We know it. But it is still very fun to watch to see how fast some of these guys run. I don't think anyone would break the record like Xavier Worthy did in terms of speed this year. A lot of these receivers are a lot bigger guys that kind of win with other ways. So I would be surprised if Xavier Worthy's 40-yard dash record got broken. That's for sure. But some guys that could do it: Ty Felton, very fast; Tez Johnson, very fast. There are some guys that will put up fast numbers this year, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Xavier Worthy last year was very, very fast prospect, and I don't think we've got one of those guys this year. But still going to be a lot of fun to watch. If one of these wide receivers does fall, I think Luther Burden is probably going to be at the top of the list. Burden is someone who some character issues have kind of come up for him over recent weeks, and someone who was not actually in, I believe, Daniel Jeremiah's second mock draft, or Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft 2.0, which was maybe surprising to some, but Burden is someone who I think could definitely fall out of day 1. I have him on it as a late round 2 grade into the early round 3 grade. So I'm not a big Luther Burden guy either, but he's someone I think could fall. Ted McMillan, it'll be interesting to see him at the Senior Bowl, especially in some of these like fade drills, because we've seen some of these workout clips that Ted McMillan has done in high school, and it is crazy to see like what he can do. His body control in the air, his in-air movement, and all of that is something special to watch. So I'm excited to see if Ted McMillan can make some pretty crazy catches as well. So that is kind of the quarterback, running back, wide receivers. And then let's wrap things up here with the offensive line. Washington, if I was a football GM, if I was a GM in the NFL, I would be drafting offensive linemen every single year. Every single year. You can never have too many good offensive linemen. In Washington's case, they don't have a ton of great offensive linemen. I know Washington and Adam Peters have shown a lot of confidence in who they have with their starting 5 right now, but even behind them, the bench isn't that great. I think Washington needs to get younger at the across the offensive line and bring in but yeah, bring in some young guys, and whether that is going to be maybe a project like a Cam Williams or maybe someone else like Ariante Ursary eventually. It'll be interesting to see who they kind of go after. I will say, in terms of the measurements, offensive line will be the number one I'm going to be looking at, because we're getting first time measurements for guys like Cam Williams, Calvin Banks, Will Campbell. A lot of these guys who I've mentioned it on previous pods where you kind of conflicted if they're going to be a tackle or a guard in the NFL. I know Cam Williams is kind of a different story on his own, but for Banks and Campbell, will they be a tackle? Will they be a guard? So we're getting measurements on these guys, which is huge: arm length, hand size, wingspan, all of that. So that'll be fun to watch. Um, yeah, I think arm length is huge, especially for some of these guys who are kind of borderline tackle versus guard. I, I, I mean, some of these top guys, I still think you should put out a tackle before you really see them fail at tackle first before they move them inside the guard. But I mean, there's still going to be a lot of good guys to watch on the offensive line. I think Washington should definitely be in the market to draft an offensive lineman on day two, at least. So, I mean, if it's not day one, with the 29th overall pick, and then on day two, but Washington needs an offensive lineman, I feel like, because this starting five you have right now is solid, but it's still kind of very vulnerable. And maybe Biotish is good, great. Allegretti, fine. Wiley, fine. Coleman is kind of a variable there. You don't really know what you got still. And Brandon Coleman is kind of up and down. And then Sam Cosmi, you're not going to have for at least the start of next season, most likely. So there's going to need to be depth on that offensive line, and I think Washington needs to address that in the draft. So with that being said, let's wrap this up here on this episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. Next week's episode will be a scouting combine recap, and we'll most likely have a guest on that one. So that will be looking forward to that next week. We've got a lot of draft stuff coming up. I'm excited too, because in a couple of weeks, I'm going to go over my full offseason blueprint for the Washington Commanders. So be excited for that. We're going to go through a mock free agency, mock draft, all of it. It's going to be an offseason blueprint for the Washington Commanders. I'm looking forward to that one. It's going to be a lot of fun. That'll be in like 2-3 weeks or so. I'm working on that now. So that'll be a lot of fun. But thank you guys, everyone, for watching or listening to another episode of Keeping Up with Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan. That'll do it for this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys next one. Peace.